There's nobody here now, just so you know. It's just us. Okay. So, tell me, where do you work?
So I work now for the Department of Defense, as in the whole depart, not a organization. I mean, an organization inside the Department of Defense. And but I serve all service members in the role that I work in. So supporting all the service members across the entire Department of Defense.
Okay. And how many years have you been at the DOD?
I've been DoD centric since I became a government civilian in 2019 when I first started working for the federal government as a government employee. I was working at the Department of the Army. I was in a term position at the time. And after about 4 years there, I moved to the Department of the Air Force into a permanent position. I was at the Department of the Air Force for probably about a year and a half before I was made the move up to DoD, and that was a promotion for me. So that
Hmm.
was a really exciting opportunity, and it was also back doing work that I enjoyed doing. It was more focused on the type of work I enjoyed doing as it related to working with policy versus more like just kind of communications type of stuff, which is what I was doing when I worked at the Air Force.
Okay. So you started at the DOD in 2019.
Army, yeah, and then
Okay.
Air Force, and then big. I say big DoD.
Hmm. That was at the Pentagon?
Yeah, I was Pentagon's. I've been Pentagon centric the entire time.
Okay. Okay. So can you give me a little bit more detail on what you do at the Pentagon?
So a majority of the time that I've been working for the both the Army and now at the DoD, I do policy writing basically or
Hmm.
policy analysis.
Hmm.
The roles have been called different things over the years. In the Department of Defense, the only people who are actually in charge of publishing policy are, the Department of Defense is the Undersecretary of Defense. In the Army, it's, I think, the assistant secretary the assistant to the secretary of the Army. So it's a very high level person who's typically a presidentially appointed um, that is the person who signs off on policy. And that policy goes through a lot of coordination before it comes out. So any regulation or memo that's going to come out has to be coordinated with any stakeholders that have, a stake in the policy that's coming out or any changes to that policy. So, for example, if Congress makes a law change about something in one of the NDAAs, it's going to impact policy and then that policy has to be updated. So the work that I do is primarily working with the subject matter experts and the programs to get those changes made to prepare the policy for going through that process. And that process realistically takes probably like a year and a half to 2 years,
Hmm.
depending on the policy and what changes are being made.
Okay. Could you give us an example of something that you're working on now?
Um, One of the things that I work on is transition assistance policies. So service members who are separating from the military are mandated by Congress to go through what is referred to as the transition assistance program. And that policy has been going through, it was going through some revisions and then additional revisions have been being made. And Congress has a lot of impacts that they want on the policy. There's a lot of things they want to mandate for service members because the numbers that we have to report on across the DOD um, are very definitely not 100%. um,
Hmm.
and so, of course, if when you have something that's mandated by Congress, Congress wants a majority of people to be meeting that requirement. And the reality is that's not what happens with transition in most cases.
Okay, so what do you mean by transition? So people being discharged from the
Yeah,
military or
basically, yeah. So transition from the military to civilian life. So everybody who comes into the military, the thing that Congress will say, and you'll hear a lot of other people who work in those spaces say, is the military takes 9 months to a year and a half, depending on the job, to train you, and 5 days of training to send you back into the world as a civilian, which is technically true. And that 5 days of training is usually spaced out over a significant amount of time. But it is preparing the service member for what they plan to do when they get out. So whether that separation is voluntary or involuntary, they are required to go through transition assistance.
mm, okay, so would you be able to describe a little bit what transition assistance is?
So Congress mandates a certain time frame. So I think it's a year minimum before you separate. You're supposed to go through transition. You're supposed to start your transition basically, and it starts with briefings, meetings with transition counselors, and then it also goes, and then you start taking classes. And over the years, it's become where it's more personalized to the soldier as opposed to a one size kind of fits all method. But, so if it's your first, say you only did one tour and you're just ending your service honorably and you didn't do anything wrong or anything, and you say did like 4 years and now you just want to get out, you're done, and you're planning on going to college. So then your transition experience will be focused on finding a college applications, figuring out what you want to major in, like those types of things, figuring out how your military experience translates to what you want to do after the military. If you're retiring with 20 plus years of service, then you're going to have a different goal and experience potentially of like, do I want to work? Do I want to take some time off and just relax? If I do want to work, what do I want to do? Do I want to, you know, go into a leadership position somewhere else? Am I tired of being in a leadership position and I just want to do something, um, simple and just, as I've heard people say, you know, not be home all the time. Because, of course, when a lot of people retire from the military, after 20 years, they're really still like probably in their late 30s or early 40s in a lot of cases.
Hmm. Yeah. So this transition assistance policy that you're working on right now, um, is it something that you had started working on prior to the Trump administration, or is this something new?
Yeah, no, it was being worked on prior to the Trump administration. There were the revisions being mandated in the transition assistance program are mostly influenced by Congress, not so much the president. Obviously, he has his influence in other ways at USD, the USD level, and then of course, we partner for transition assistance. We partner with the VA and the Department of Labor significantly because there's a lot of overlap in what we do with those organizations as well. So this revision has been in the works for quite a while, and it's still in the very early stages. And
Mm.
there's actually in the most current NDAA that passed the House, there's more changes. So if that
Mm.
NDA passes, we're going to have to make I I guess we'll have to make even more. I don't know if we're gonna have to pull it back and start over or what's gonna happen, but
So the
If
Trump administration can make some changes while this process is going on.
so an example of policy changes that came down because of the Trump administration, executive order, I can't remember the name right now, but it's like 13168, I think, which it was the gender executive order.
Mm-hmm.
Um, resulted in a flurry of policy changes, what we refer to as administrative changes, to basically go through every single policy document and form and change the word from gender to sex anywhere it was used.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, it doesn't really change the meaning of much of anything in most of our documents, and a majority of us, at least for service members, there's not really an ability to be non-binary as a service member. You either present as male or female.
Mm-hmm.
So prior to this administration, so it was still a binary gender situation. You were either male or female, but and then you fell in with either the male or female standard. But we had to go through and change the word sex to gender, and then of course there were policy changes to the actual um, policies that govern transgender service and um, working with probably mostly the medical policies around that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So that's an example of a major policy change that we had to work through, um, reviewing all of our regulations and then identifying which ones needed to be updated, making those changes, and then getting them through the process as quickly as possible. They were supposed to all be done by March 30th or something like that. They weren't.
Mm,
They were definitely not.
yeah. Yeah. That seems like a lot to change.
Well, yeah, it's definitely a lot because there's a lot of things where you know, there's a lot of things where there's different expectations or standards, or we're collecting information, we're collecting the data for different reporting purposes, and we have to say that we're collecting the data for different reporting purposes.
Mm-hmm.
And if we're collecting that data, then we would have to say like, oh, you sex versus gender. And then of course
Yeah.
also changing the forms. So
Yeah. So then can you describe some other changes that you're experiencing at your job at the DOD?
um a lot of people in the DOD, I think at this point, I know I feel a little bit safer than I think other organizations do. The
Mm-hmm.
DOD, through DRP, took a pretty substantial cut. I think Hegseth said he was looking for like 8%. The numbers that I've seen DOD wide um, equal 8%. There, I think, was a question of whether or not it was like 8% of every organization or 8% total. And then, of course, when you look at like organizations and sub-organizations across the Department of Defense, which is just such a huge organization, the Army, the Marine Corps, the Navy, the Air Force, the Space Force, the Guard, and the Reserve of those organizations, and then all the different field activities in those organizations are kind of their own unique little things as well. So, like one organization inside, for example, the Department of the Army, that's a very large civilian organization, is the HR organization. HR tends to be, there's of course a lot of HR military professionals, but HR still ends up being fairly civilian heavy. And so when you talk about things like DRP, those organizations probably took a significantly larger hit than other organizations where there was a smaller civilian population. But of course, if you have a smaller civilian population and that civilian population leaves, then it's even a bigger impact. And the
Mm-hmm.
other thing that I think I saw is that I think a majority of the people who took DRP were retirement eligible anyway, and would have been retiring in the next probably year or so, or were eligible for early retirement. Um, and so that was a lot of knowledge and history and, what we call institutional knowledge lost. And the thing with the Department of Defense is we're not an organization that changes easily. And a lot of the times, even if we do change, and this has happened very recently, just in my limited time within the Department of Defense, you're changing back and forth with the administration. And I mean, we saw that with Trump the first time with the transgender ban, then it being undone, then it being re-implemented and at a higher, more extreme level. So, um, you know, we're very much at the mercy of the president in that way, but also like at least if you have someone who was here the last couple times, you know where the files are and you can just go back to them type of thing.
Yeah.
And sometimes those files don't end up in like share drives and things like that. So then it's if it's all on someone's file and they leave, then you lost it all.
Yeah. So is that something that you're experiencing now?
I haven't seen it too much in the organization that I'm in. We did some of our programs took larger hits. Some of them didn't take as big of a hit. My team, none of us actually took DRP. Specifically, we have lost one team member since, but not because of DRP. He took a different job.
Mm.
Um, so it's but there's been the biggest, I think, impact in my organization was our director took DRP, but it was kind of funny because he was retiring anyway, once
Hmm.
again. So like he just left like 6 months earlier than he was going to.
Hmm.
So
Yeah. Okay, so some changes that you're experiencing are since you're working in policy, you're having some changes due to the DEI cuts. You have to change policy. If it says gender, you have to change it to sex. Um, right now, you said that there's some policy changes being voted on in the House, and that's affecting something that you're working on right now.
mhm.
And then you're also experiencing some changes with staff leaving from DRP and Vera and other things like that, and
Yeah.
loss of institutional knowledge.
Yeah, definitely. It's definitely been a lot more upheaval than I've seen, and I think a lot of other people have said a lot more upheaval than they've seen in other presidential transitions. Because presidential transitions always come with a bit of an upheaval, but
Hmm.
this one's definitely even some of the leadership initially at the beginning, they were like, this isn't any different than any other time. And then they very rapidly were like, this is unprecedented.
So even then, they had admitted that this is unprecedented.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, it took them a while, but I saw it and I was like, no, this is, I mean, because people were saying, oh, people who'd been around for like, 30 years and went through, there was a big riff, I guess, back when Clinton was in office.
Hmm.
That people that I've work with experienced and navigated. I was in elementary school when was president, so I'm like I had no clue what was going on at that time.
Yeah.
And people are like, oh, we've been through this before when things, there was talks about RIF, and there are a lot of processes and rules around RIFs, and then it became evident that this administration wasn't interested in following the rules and was trying to change all the rules and skirt the rules as and obviously they're doing that in a lot of different places, not just with personnel actions.
Mm-hmm.
So it was kind of something that I think, and it was interesting because in the with the DRP, of course, there was the very first one, which was that email called what they called the fork email.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I think there was actually a larger loss in the second round because people saw that it actually did happen and they trusted the process when they did the second round of DRP.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people they were experiencing a lot of changes and a lot of uncertainty and they were just tired of it.
Yeah, and I think people were like, would rather, I mean, even for myself at the beginning, um, I saw the writing on the wall and I was like, I started looking at job opportunities elsewhere in the private sector.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, the job market was already evidently really bad because I hadn't been looking. And then I also realized that, at least for me, there wasn't a very good rollover for me in the private sector. And but if, once again, people who are retiring, people who might have better opportunities or easier access to opportunities or a skill that is more translatable to the private sector, might have made different decisions.
So that's why you decided to stay.
Well, I was nowhere near retirement eligible.
Yeah.
Or I am nowhere near retirement eligible. And I did definitely was like, I'm not going to be able to find something um, that's equitable to where I'm at now
Mm-hmm.
in the private sector. The positions that I was looking at that were like salary and benefit wise, even were more leadership positions, and I'm not in a leadership position in my job. I'm a peon.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So
So how has the return to office affected you and your job?
the return to office, I think, was another thing that was like, you know, it was really hard for a lot of people. And I think, different people responded to it differently. Some people were like, oh, nobody was happy. I would say that. Like, I don't know a single person who was like, yay, we're back in office. Like, everybody was like, this blows. We hate this.
Mm-hmm.
Um, productivity went down 100%. Not 100% like measurable, but just like definitely went down.
Yeah.
And for me personally, it was a huge, huge impact. This position that I moved into, was fairly recently before the inauguration, and so it was a promotion for me. So my husband and I had made some decisions and started doing certain things at the beginning of the year, um, with the understanding that, we'd be working with X amount of money. And with return to office, obviously I had to start commuting every day, which costs money. Um, and my husband had to actually cut back his work hours,
Mm.
from working, 8-hour days or more to working max 6-hour days so that he could be home when the kids got home from school.
Mm.
Because when I was teleworking, I was home.
Yeah.
They would get off the bus and I was there, and we have young children. They're not old enough to be home alone. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and we also I have 4 children. So I told my husband, as we adjusted to that, I'm like, well, the oldest is okay for a little bit by himself. But when the other ones get home, it's not, somebody needs to be home, an adult needs to be home because they will start fighting. They will, and who knows what'll happen.
Yeah.
So, yeah, he had to cut back his work hours. And then, of course, over the summer, it was a drastic, drastic change for us. Normally, with telework flexibilities, we had the flexibility to travel, and like I would take my kids to visit my parents for the summer to alleviate like the cost of like day camps and things like that. With the RTO mandate, that flexibility was gone. I couldn't, drive halfway across the country over the weekend, work, and then for a telework from another location and then come back. That wasn't an option. Um, and then of course my husband, because the kids were home, he had to be home. So he pretty much didn't work almost at all
Hmm.
most of the summer. Um, so that really, really, really impacted our finances of like, yes, I'm making more money, but I'm not offsetting the money, or I'm barely offsetting the money that we are now losing. And so what we had hoped was going to be a opportunity for us to finally kind of start, you know, getting ahead a little bit ended up not. And my kids are, my youngest child said to me, um, not long after all of this happened, well, I don't like Trump because he took my mommy away from me.
Aw.
And my youngest is 7, and I've been there for him, with COVID and everything. He doesn't really remember pre-COVID.
Hmm.
So, mommy's been home and taking care of him and being his, doing all the things.
Yeah.
And, is pretty much all that he remembers. So,
Aw, that's sad.
so
Yeah.
the
So then, in the office, how is it working with all these other people next to you?
well, you're definitely more distracted. I'm a pretty social person, so, I'm gonna go talk to my coworkers and, we're gonna catch up. And I'm fortunate in that the people that are in my immediate vicinity, are we get along and we have similar opinions on things. So we'll share memes, and we'll share some dark humor. And when we get irritated, my former coworker who left, when we'd get really mad about something or something would happen and we'd be like, OMG, this is so like ridiculous and stupid, and we're just so upset about this, I would go show him cat videos. So like, um like it kind of, gives you a benefit of like, oh, we can kind of bond over our frustrations, but
Hmm.
we're also like all frustrated about the same things. And they're all things that, well, I'm not going to say all things that we shouldn't have to be frustrated about. But some of these changes, of course, like the RTO mandate, are just stupid. And I'm like, why?
Yeah. Yeah. So, does everybody in your vicinity have the same security clearance?
As far as I'm aware, probably most of the positions I've held require a secret clearance. Not that
Hmm.
most of the stuff I handle is really even really secret, because most of the material I deal with is pre-decisional. There's a classification with that, but it's not a very high classification. Um, so we're all, I think, pretty much at the same level in terms of working with pre-decisional material.
Okay, that's good. So, speaking of classification and classified materials, what are your thoughts about the signal leak that happened a while ago with Hegseth and the war plans?
Oh yeah, I started referring to him as Whiskey Leaks after that. I think that's my favorite nickname for him. I don't have as many good nicknames for some of the other secretaries, but I like that one for Hegseth.
Yeah.
It was atrocious and ridiculous, and anybody with two brain cells to rub together can recognize that that chat was absolutely top secret information. And anyone else, had that kind of information been released, would have been fired, probably court-martialed. In fact, people have been fired and court-martialed for leaking less than that. And we are required to take, mandatory training on, classification. I think there's a handful of there's the cybersecurity training that we take, which deals a little bit with, leaking information and classification. There's actual classification training. There's a training we take called insider threat training to identify like who might leak information and how they
Hmm.
can be targeted. We take training on operational security, and part of operational security is information security. So, and then depending, sometimes, and then I think in most cases, also a separate like info security training as well. And all of those trainings, for as long as I've been well, to kind of backtrack, I became a civilian in 2019, but I was in the Army, and then I was actually working in contracting for a number of years in between there as well. So I've been DOD centric and been taking a majority of those trainings virtually every year since 2010.
Oh, wow.
um, had a little bit of time off when I left the Army, but it wasn't much, probably like 2 years.
Hmm.
So that stuff is just so ingrained into me, and it's like this goes against, and then it makes me feel, of course, like I'm gonna probably have to renew that training in the next month or two, a couple months, because it's based on when you onboard. And I'm like, why do I have to take this training? This training is pointless. Why am I taking this training if the Secretary of Defense can leak war plans and face no consequences?
Yeah, and everybody else is backing him up and saying, no, it's not classified materials. No, it's not a big deal that he did that. It was just a casual chat.
And like, and the it just and the number of things, which I mean, I don't work military operations at this point, and but we I deployed when I was in the Army, and we couldn't even tell our families when we were traveling.
Mhm.
You can't even tell your family when you're traveling for training within the United States. When I left the military, the Army, and I had started having children, um, my ex-husband and their father was at a, it, like month-long training event, and I was trying to get information on if anyone had heard when they were gonna, uh, like not like what time are they gonna be back,
Yeah.
day, like are they coming back, or like even a range. And I couldn't even get that information. That's considered
Wow.
OPSEC in military. And the thing is like even military spouses and family members are informed and held, not held to the same standard, of course, but it's enforced throughout the military that you protect that type of information, maneuvers, movements, times, absolutely. And once again, the classification training that all military personnel, service members and civilians get, talks about classification levels, and that training is very, very simple. When you take something like times and places and equipment, or you know whatever, and you put those three things together, that's a top secret clearance issue, um and once again, like if that information was intercepted, the people flying those planes could have been targeted and hurt and potentially killed. So the fact that there hasn't been consequences, I think, as someone who works in the Department of Defense, as someone who's been a service member and is a veteran, as someone who was, married to a service member, I think I speak for a lot of people where, it's upsetting. It's extremely upsetting.
Mhm.
And
So do you feel like you can be more laxed in your work, not as careful about, I don't know, any security measures that you are supposed to take because of the secretary and
No.
everybody else? No.
I personally, personally, I hold myself to the standard that we are supposed to hold ourselves to as, a person with a secret clearance, as a veteran, um, as a DOD employee. There's a standard, and I care about the service members, whether or not our
Hmm.
Secretary of Defense does. Um, and I'm not going to jeopardize their safety. And the other fact of it, as hypocritical as it all is if I did do something, I would be fired. Absolutely.
Yeah.
I would face consequences.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm not immune.
Yeah. So what are some other issues that you're experiencing at your job?
Well, the other big one for me personally, and for the people that I work with on my team, is the Schedule F 2.0, as we refer to it as. It's the schedule career/policy change that Trump is working with OPM to change a lot of the classifications of civil servants so that it can be easier to fire them, basically,
Mm-hmm.
and take away their protections. I am not, nor have I ever been in a union type of position. There are positions across the federal government that are unionized positions. I'm not in one of them.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but the career/policy um, schedule change executive order is number one, is straight out of Project 2025. And it's the way it's written, you can write it off and be like, oh, well, it says like if you're a poor performer, blah, 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 then it's easier for you to get fired. Okay, yes, that's how it's written. And yes, are there poor performers in the federal government that it has been, maybe hard to fire because of how rules are set up within the federal government? Um, yeah, probably. But that's a management issue, a supervisor issue, not a policy issue. And I've taken supervisor training of my own volition. And so I'm aware of what the expectations are for, managing and leading people, and, people who are underperforming. I'm aware of the rules and regulations around, EEO complaints and things like that. If somebody feels they're being targeted, because they're being versus being a poor performer. I've heard stories of people abusing the complaint process because they were poor performers. So like those things happen. They happen everywhere. They don't just happen in the federal government. Um, but the reality is federal employees, um, even the ones at the top, we really don't make that much money. Um, a lot of people say there's more money in contracting. Probably depends on what type of contracting you're doing. Obviously, if you own a contracting business and you get government contracts, you're probably going to be in good shape. But people don't go into government service because of, money. And for a long time, it was considered a career with a purpose, and it was considered a career that was going to be stable and provide you with, a paycheck, pretty good benefits, and a decent retirement when reached retirement age. And Trump and Vought um, have vilified federal employees, most of whom I told one of my previous supervisors that I love working in the federal government because every job that I've had, even if I didn't necessarily like certain aspects of the work itself, it was very, very easy to care about the mission. Working, especially in the Department of Defense, across the different agencies that I've worked for, we, our mission predominantly, no matter what I've done, has been to take care of service members and making policy updates that benefit um, service members, or making the policy more clear for the service members and their commanders, making sure that it's that that you understand what the expectations are and what the rules are around whatever the subject of the policy is. Um, because and a lot of people probably don't think that that's important. And when I left service myself, I never envisioned myself, even at that time, being a government civilian. And I would have told you when I separated from the Army, if you told me that probably about 5 years later, not even, I'd be writing Army regulations and enjoying myself, I would have laughed in your face. And then I started doing it, and I realized how much I truly enjoy that work. And I refer to myself as a policy nerd now. And when I was able to get back into doing it, with this newer job at the DOD level, working back in policy and programs that, directly support the service member um, and their families, is, I think, something that is just very easy to care about. Um, those types of programs, it's very easy to see the impact. Um, and of course, we do more than just policy. We do, congressional reports and other types of legislative and investigative reports from like IG and stuff like that. So those types of things come down as well, and we're involved with that because the reality is, in my experience across the Department of Defense, the subject matter experts aren't or shouldn't be writing the policy. Because policy, when you have subject matter level expertise, it's not everything makes sense to you. And you don't know how to explain it to someone who doesn't have subject matter level expertise. So for me, my role working as a kind of policy analyst writer has been to be that person that doesn't have a subject matter expertise and kind of facilitates between. And I always tell my subject matter experts, I'm asking the dumb questions because I don't actually know much about, I don't have subject matter level expertise on X, Y, or Z. I know enough to know what I'm talking about, but I'm not a subject matter expert. And I am going to be like, hey, this doesn't make sense because this doesn't make sense. Like, I'm reading this and it doesn't make sense to me. And I'm a, service member, I'm a veteran, I'm a well-educated person. So if I don't understand what you're saying, the service member is definitely not going to understand what you're saying. So I truly enjoy what I do, and I would be devastated if I was to lose my job. The Schedule F 2.0 concerns me because Trump's already talked about targeting quote unquote Democratic agencies. And even, I think he's even slipped and said the quiet part out loud and said he's going to target Democrats themselves, which we all knew was going to happen. I don't consider myself a Democrat, but I've been voting Democrat as of 2016. Um, and um, it's, it's a little scary to think that I could lose my job because I don't like the president or I don't like the Secretary of Defense. I still do my job, and I do my job very well. I have never gotten anything below a, meets standards. I've typically gotten exceeds or far exceeds standard reviews over the last number of years from my supervisors. So it's frustrating to be in a position where I have to kind of have that in the back of my mind of, could that happen? Are they going to, you know, attempt to do loyalty tests? Are they going to try to make that something that you can be fired for? And I'm not, as much as I love my job and I love serving our service members, I'm not going to swear fealty to the president to keep my job. It's an that's against the oath that we take. The civilian employees take an oath very similarly to the oath that service members take when they enlist, um, and or officers. They're two separate oaths. So, and the civilian one is slightly different, but they're all pretty much the same. I swear to support and defend the Constitution from all enemies, foreign and domestic, and do the job and listen to the people who are above me and, carry out the duties of my position. Um, and I'm paraphrasing, obviously, but that's what we do. And it is extremely frustrating to think that, I could be targeted because of my voting record or because I don't agree with the president. Um, Even if, like, Congress is passing legislation and I'm like, this is stupid, I'm still going to update the regulation to reflect what Congress says. That's my job. I don't have, um, you know, new legislation will pass, new president will hopefully come in, and then in another 4 or 5 years, I'll have to undo all the work I spent the last 4 years doing.
Yeah.
So I just hope I'm still around to undo the damage that's being done, I guess. And I think the other part of it is I um well, and then for me, my team, obviously we all work on policy, so we would all fall under that. We lost a team member recently to another position in another agency, and I am 90% certain that a big part of the reason he decided to take that job was because it's not a policy position and would not be impacted by the Schedule F 2.0 changes. And he's trying to protect himself and his career as well.
Yeah. Dang.
And I know because um, he it was actually extremely funny in a dark humor type of way because the position that he ended up leaving for, he had been he had interviewed for and offered that position, and I was actually being brought in to replace him because he was taking the position. And then by the time I onboarded, he had changed his mind and was not going to take the position. So that was in like early December.
Hmm.
And so then after the inauguration and the hiring freezes and everything, um, and the DRPs and all the other things that happened, I think the organization came to him and, you know, again and again offered him the position. And he was like, at that point, he was like, I'm gonna take this position because, it was something he was good at. It was something, once again, it was a not a policy type of position that would be impacted by that change. And but he's since reached out to us and he's like, this is definitely not, people are unorganized. The onboarding process was difficult. He's uh frustrated. I think there's a lot of, small things that he had to give up um, to make that move, from where he was working with me to where he's working now in terms of like, you know, our office, for example, environment is a bit more casual than his new office environment. It's a bit more formal. So
Hmm.
he's and just culture. I think our office is a very worker centric, and our supervisors and our leaders in our organization care about us, and it's pretty evident in how a lot of the policies have been enacted at like the lowest levels, whereas I can't say the same for other organizations, even within the DOD. So
Yeah, it's tough. So we have about less than 10 minutes left now. What is one main message that you would like to get across to the public about what you're experiencing, either at your job or, you know, in your life, due to the Trump administration?
I think the biggest thing that, you know, I want people to understand is that everything that is happening, whether, I know Trump came out and said that he wasn't part of or he didn't know about Project 2025. That has been obviously and blatantly shown to be a lie. Everything that is happening is in there. And as it relates to federal employees, um, they talk about decentralizing the federal government, and people think that's a good thing. It's not. A lot of the things that are handled um, across the federal agencies, people may not realize how much it impacts them, but it really does. And I think people are going to start realizing that. And um, I think the other thing is that, people, especially like the position that I'm in, it's, I would say for me personally, what I do doesn't really directly impact most regular people. But once again, work, the work I do is for our service members. So if people still care about our service members, and our veterans, then um, civilians are a key element of the Department of Defense itself, the institutional knowledge, because when service members move a lot. They move every 3 years or so, depending on the position they're in. And so if you have a service member coming in to fill a job in an agency and then they are leaving, they're to, they may have some time to train their replacement. They may not. It kind of depends on the situation. Um, but the civilians are typically the people, and we are typically recognized as the people who are holding, the knowledge and the history of you know, oh, we've done that before. Because the other thing that happens is, service members will come in and have like, oh, we should do this. Yeah, we tried that. It didn't work. And that's not anything with this administration, just, things in general that happen. And so when you lose that institutional knowledge, it can be extremely damaging. And realistically, that's what's happened. And people refer to it as a brain drain. And it was extremely interesting to me when I started this job because somebody referred to me as like, not a newbie in the federal government anymore. And I still very definitely feel that way myself. And it's interesting because even though I've been a civilian since 2019, the first approximately 4 years was in a term position. So that time um, sort of doesn't count for like a lot of things. It counts for some things, but not other things. It did not count um, in terms of probationary status, but I was not in a probationary status at the um, when the whole probationary thing was happening at the beginning of the administration's takeover. So I was actually, it was something like 6 months outside of it. It was like, I was right there. I was like, phew.
That's lucky.
So it's funny when people talk about like, oh, you've been around, you're not a newbie anymore. And I'm like, I've literally only been a permanent federal civilian for almost 2 years. Yeah, we're like, it's been like just over 2 years now.
Mhm.
Um, And like I don't even have what they call tenure or whatever, like there's a point in which you go from career conditional to like permanent. So I'm still in the window.
Hmm.
Um, and I think, they want to make it, you know, easier to fire people who are in probationary status. But the reality is like all of those people who are in probationary status were probably high performing. Like those are the people who are excited to have a new job or excited to be new supervisors. Those are not the people you want to be targeting
Yeah.
for for firing.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah. Okay. Well, is there any last comments that you would like to get off your chest?
um, I think going back to just like that personal impact of like, most of us have families. A lot of us have children, even young children. Not all federal employees are dodgy old men. Um, and I know people who had to use leave so that they could leave, start, like literally burn through their leave because they didn't have childcare and the RTO mandate, and they were on waiting lists and whatever, but they couldn't get care, and they had to use their leave to leave work early every single day so that they could be home for their kids when they got out of school. And then, of course, dealing with, days where school isn't in, is the kids are off. Um, and as it relates, I think, right now to the furlough, I'm fortunate in that I consider myself fortunate in that I'm not a um, required employee. I'm not a accepted employee, um, because those people still have to pay for childcare and gas and all of that, and they're not getting paid. I'm guessing people who are paying for childcare are probably still sending their paying for it because if they don't, they're going to lose their slot. So for people who are in that position, that's a huge expense. Um, and you know, a lot of service members, of course, are especially junior enlisted service members are at poverty level, especially if they have families. So it's just important to remember that um, that's the people who are impacted by, the shutdown that we're facing. I fully support what the Democrats are doing to try to protect people's health care. Um, and I think the final thing that I'd like to kind of focus on is I think, and I don't know if it's passed, it might have passed in the big bullshit bill, um, was federal employee salary raises. So typically every year we get a salary raise, 3%, 4%, whatever. Um, and it's usually really just to keep up with the cost of living. I believe the proposed raise this year for most of us who are not law enforcement and military, like active military, was 1%. And even our healthcare premiums are going up. So, and they're going up by more than 1%. So
Yeah.
we're basically losing money now at this point with the cost of premiums going up, um, because it's not just impacting like people who are on the Affordable Care Act or Medicaid or Medicare. It's impacting federal employees as well because of the way the marketplace works. I haven't seen the numbers for this year, but um, I'm not looking forward to it.
Yeah.
Um, it went up last year. Just my copays went from like $35 to
Oh,
$50.
that's crazy.
And that's just for like that's for like specialist visits and like urgent care visits. So like anytime I have to go to urgent care or take my kids to urgent care, it went from $35 or $37 to $50.
Ugh. Wow.
Yeah. So it's, you know, um we're out here just trying to get by just like everybody else and except the, 1%. We're not the 1%, trust me.
Yeah. Yeah. That's crazy. Well, I thank you for your time. We've only had at most 7 people join us at once. Right now there's 5 people. Nobody has asked a single question. A lot of quiet listeners. So thank you.
Oh,
This has
that's
been
okay.
great.
Well, thank you for, your time and letting me, tell my perspective and my experience. I think it's important that people hear from us and, you know, and understand that a lot of us, even if we don't support what the administration is doing, we're just trying to do our jobs. And a lot of our jobs aren't exciting, flashy jobs that you hear about.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Thank you. You have a good night.
Thank you so much. You too.
Bye.
Bye.